Hello, I'm Gwen Hill, Pine Ridge Baptist Church, Ladies Sunday School Department, and we're studying Genesis, and we're in the 46th chapter today. In Genesis 46, in verses 1 through 4, we find Jacob, Israel, leaving Canaan and going toward Egypt. It's a trip that'd be hard for a 130-year-old man to make, but his soul is joyful because he's going to get to see his son, who he had thought for 22 years was dead. He'll get to see Joseph, be reunited with him. In the middle of all that joy, there's some fear as well, because he has listened and remembers well what his fathers, Abraham and Isaac, both have told him about messages from God that they had received, warning them not to go to Egypt. One of those is in chapter 15 of Genesis, and it's God speaking in the 13th verse, and we hear this. Then he, that's God, said to Abram, "Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them for 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge afterward, that they shall come out with great possessions." Told that they're going to be slaves, be servants for 400 years in a foreign land. And then we're going to go to 26 verse 2, and this is the Lord speaking to Isaac. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I shall tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give these lands, and I will perform an oath which I swore to Abraham your father." So Jacob knows both his father and his grandfather were told, don't you go down to Egypt. Don't you dare. Okay? And they did. Well, Abraham did twice and got in trouble both times. And he doesn't want to get into that. He does not want to disobey what the Lord wants him to do. So he feels torn. The Lord has told him not to go. His family has told him he has to go to get food in a famine. And his heart is telling him he wants to go to see Joseph. So what he wants to do is go to Beersheba. That's where he's had an altar and where Isaac has had an altar in the past. And he wants to talk to God. So in verse 1, so Israel took his journey with all that he had, and he came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father, Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night, and he said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he said, "Here I am." He'd been listening for that call. We need to be listening, don't we? Verse 3, God is speaking, and he says, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make of you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hands on your eyes." There's a lot of material in these verses. When he says, "I'm the God of your father, do not fear," he knows. He knows just exactly what Jacob is feeling, just like he knows what you're feeling and what I'm feeling, what bothers you, what terrifies you, what makes you happy. And he tells him, he said, "Don't be afraid to go. I have great promises and great plans for you there." And then what a wonderful sentence when he tells Jacob, "I'll go with you. I'll go with you, Jacob. I'll be with you. And if I go with you, I'll surely bring you back again. And Joseph will put his hands on your eyes." He's telling Jacob, he said, "Jacob, I know you don't want to leave this land, but you need to go. It's within my plan, and it's fine. I don't want you to be afraid. You will stay there, and you will die there. But your people will come back to this land. He always intended for Joshua to have the birthright, and here he is assured of that. He's assured first, Joseph is alive. Then he's assured he will be with you at the time of your death, and he will close your eyes. He will hold the birthright. It was a responsibility and an honor for the person holding the birthright to close the eyes of the father dying. And so when he told him this, that he would close his eyes, it would have been very comforting to Jacob. Okay, verse 5, 6, and 7. Then Jacob rose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried their father Jacob, their little ones, their wives, in the carts which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. So they took their livestock and their goods which they had acquired in the land of Canaan, and they went to Egypt. Jacob and all of his descendants with him, his sons, his sons' sons, his daughters, his sons' daughters, and all of his descendants he brought with him to Egypt. In the next 18 verses, it's a genealogy. And if you look at it, a lot of times the purpose for the genealogy is so that we can see these people. The purpose of this one is to just so we can see the names and the numbers of how many are going to Egypt. Remember, they don't count the ladies in this. This is only the males. I like to read the genealogy sometimes. You get a lot of information from there. Something you might find that was interesting there is which one of the brothers do you think had the most children? Which one do you think? Well, it was the youngest one, Benjamin. He had 10 sons when he started on this trip. Ooh, some of them were prolific during this time. Genesis 46, 26, 27, 28. All of the persons who went with Jacob to Egypt, who came from his body, besides Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph, who was born to him in Egypt, were 2 persons. All the persons of the house of Jacob who went to Egypt were 70. Now, if you read in Acts, Stephen will tell you there were 75, and there's a reason for that. Stephen was quoting the Septuagint that was translated from Hebrew into Greek, and that was the common one for them to study in his day and in his time. But the Hebrew writing said 70. Why the difference? Has to do, the commentators think that has to do with where and when which sons of Joseph were listed. Joseph's 2 oldest boys are mentioned, Manasseh and Ephraim, but looking at other scriptures in the Septuagint, over Joseph's lifespan, he had 9 children. So, just that was interesting. The Dead Sea Scrolls said 75. Okay. But I just thought that was a little interesting. In verses 28 through 30, Joseph is recorded. It's being recorded here. The end of the journey, like we finally got to the beach. Well, that's what this is. Then he sent Judah before him to Joseph to point out before him the way to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. So Joseph made ready his chariot and went up to Goshen to meet his father Israel. And he presented himself to him and fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. And Israel said to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face, because you are still alive. How emotional these two men were after 22 years of separation. They loved each other desperately. This was the child that he shared with Rachel. He was around 14, 15 years old when his mother died. And that link, losing him, and that link to Rachel was hard on Jacob. And you know how hard Joseph's life's been. And they were just so thrilled to see one another. They cried and held on to each other until they were just cried out. That's what the old Hebrew, the way it infers, is that they cried till they were cried out. Jacob is ready to die now. He has seen his son. It can't get any better from here. Joseph, after they have had this emotional reunion, then he sets his dad down and with his brothers, and they've got to come up with a plan. They brought all their cattle. They brought all their sheep, which was exactly what Joseph wanted them to do. But this is not what Pharaoh wanted. Pharaoh wanted to get them in and assimilate them into Egyptian culture. That is not what God wanted. God wanted them to stay apart from Egyptian culture so that they could stay his people, their own selves, their own clan, their own family, and not assimilate into Egypt, not take on Egyptians' multi-gods, little g, but to stay monotheistic. And that would be hard to do if they were put in the mixing pot in Egypt. So to keep them separated, he wants them in Goshen, and Joseph has got a plan. He says to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and I'll tell Pharaoh and say to him, my brothers and those of my father's house who were in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for their occupation has been to feed livestock, and they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have with them. I'll prepare Pharaoh for knowing the type of work that you normally do and where you're at. Joseph continues. He said, so Pharaoh's going to ask you what your occupation is, and you are to say, your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even until now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. Joseph said that you've got to remember and say it just like I'm telling you, like I'm instructing you. Our goal is to get you settled into Goshen, but we've got to make the Pharaoh think it's his idea. Okay? What does abomination mean? Abomination means the cause of something that disgusts you or causes hatred. And in the Bible, when you see the word abomination, it means something that is very offensive to your God. If you defiled the Jewish temple in later years, that was an abomination. If you drank blood from an animal, that was an abomination because God told you not to do that. So anything you did that would offend God was an abomination. And if you didn't go to their temples to worship, then you were an abomination to the Egyptians. And shepherds lived in an area that didn't have temples, and the priests didn't come there, so they did not worship the little g gods, and so they were an abomination to the Egyptians. And lo and behold, here comes Joseph's family. Wonder if they're going to remember their instructions when they meet the Pharaoh. I don't know, but we'll find out next week in chapter 47. Have a really good week. We'll see you. We're going to study 47. Good night.